Welcome back, everyone. So we'll be continuing the morning's lectures. So over to Professor.
Thank you very much, Sandy. We are continuing the discussion on the bimetallic monetary standard and its close, which happened between the years 1873 and 78. Here's the problem. Germany didn't cause the collapse of the silver price because the large sales of melted coin silver were announced, and the announcement didn't cause any big shock in the silver market. The world expected that the Oriental demand for silver, that means India and especially China, will absorb any surplus of silver. And this was confirmed by the fact that there was no large-scale change in the movement of silver to the mint. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the dollar price of silver, the world price of silver, there was no, the silver was undervalued, and as a consequence, no, the other way around. Gold was undervalued, and as a result, silver was overvalued at the mint, and no large-scale movement of silver to the mints. And this showed that the market accepted the fact and took it in stride that the extra supply of silver is not going to upset the balance. Now, what about the American demonetization of silver? Well, here there's a little complication because, as I explained, the fact that the demonetization took place was not clear-cut. They did it underhandedly, and therefore many people may not have realized, but you can be sure that the speculators would realize it. They make it their business to read legislation. The legislators themselves may not read it, but be sure that the speculators would, and they would pick on such a point as this one. The standard silver dollar was dropped from the list of silver coins authorized for minting. Now, if they had so a dangerous signal, the speculators, that really now here two big important countries coming up, demonetize silver, if they interpreted this as a danger for the silver, they would have started selling silver short in anticipation of a continued fall in the silver price. This didn't happen. This just didn't happen. And on the day, the president, at that time it was President Grant, successful general in the Civil War on the north side, signed a bill into law on February the 12th, 1873. There was still no movement of silver to the mint, which you could use as an indicator of dumping silver. See, the speculators would have started dumping silver at the mint. And the only interpretation you can use here is that even with these two countries demonetizing silver, those who made it their business to watch the market very carefully did not see any cause for alarm. And therefore, I don't think we can blame either Germany or the United States for the collapse of the silver price during the next 60 years. Unheard of event. It's absolutely unprecedented. And if you think in terms of values disappearing from the market, this is not made clear by history books. They just pass over this fact. Two countries demonetized silver, closed their mints to silver, and therefore it's natural that the silver price falls from $1.25 an ounce to 25 cents by 1933. And I have been looking at the facts, reading as much as I could find, and came to the conclusion that there's something very, very strange here, and it's worth the extra effort to investigate what it was. In other words, I was looking for the smoking gun, and I thought I had found it as follows. Now, this is all very tentative. I'm speculating. As I pointed out, not all the facts are available. For example, it was acknowledged that a mistake was made. Congress passed a law which was unconstitutional, a very extraordinary event at that time. At that time. It happened many times after. And there was an inquiry, but it was very cursory inquiry. For instance, they didn't even investigate who in the Treasury was responsible. And just 2 years earlier, I think, the Supreme Court handed down a law, a ruling, not a law, which found a particular act of Congress 40 years prior and declared it unconstitutional. Just to sketch it very briefly, the issue was that in 1834, Congress upgraded the value of gold in terms of silver. This was in response of this flip-flop, and they thought that this makes sense to follow the gold-silver market ratio. But every time when ratio changes, they just change the bimetallic ratio. What they did, I think originally it was 1 to 16, or 16, the bimetallic ratio, established by Congress with the first coinage law in 1792. And then, after the move of the market ratio, they adjusted it to 15. What did I say, 15?
16. You
16
said initially.
It was. They adjusted.
I think it was more like 15 to 1 initially. And then they must have moved it up from 15.
Yeah, which was closer to the European bimetallic ratio, which was, I think, 16. So anyhow, Congress made that change. And then there was a lawsuit growing out of that change. Somebody claimed that as a consequence of this change, he lost value. Just think of the situation where a contract is made on the basis of 15 bimetallic ratio, and then Congress makes a law and changes to 16. This means raising the price of gold. And in fact, that's what it was. The price of gold was $19.30 before, and the result of the change, the price of gold went up to $20.60 cents, I think. So now if you had a contract made before the change, and after the change, you were the creditor. And after the change, your debtor comes and repays the loan in cheap silver, because you see, as a result, silver got cheapened. Not much, but some. And if it was a large sum, then you lost, because you were thinking in terms of gold as the unit. So anyhow, this big creditor went to the court and sued for damages. And the court rejected the claim. And then he appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And in, I think, 1871, the Supreme Court finally handed down the decision that it was against the Constitution because value was taken from somebody without compensation. Now, this is not really relevant to our story, but it's interesting to see how rigorously people interpreted the Constitution in those days. Anyhow, it was just 2 years earlier that the Supreme Court handed down a decision which could declare a law unconstitutional. And in 1873, 2 years later, we find that there was no serious investigation who was responsible for that mistake, if that is what it was. And therefore, I think the question was still open. What had really happened? So we are looking for the smoking gun, and I think I have found it. But you don't have to agree with this. Just listen to the story, and then we discuss it. I find this very interesting. I hope you also will find it interesting. So what is the smoking gun? So here are the years, one after the other, which are critical. It's 1870, the start of the Franco-Prussian War. 1871, the victory of Prussia and the big silver coin melt by the German Empire, which was born out of the Prussian victory. And then 1873, this critical legislation, Coinage Act of 1873, which underhandedly demonetized silver, closing the mint to silver. The next year to mention is 1875. And there's another piece of legislation, the Congress made a law, and this is the so-called Resumption. Act of 1875. I'll explain what it is. And then 1879, which is the actual resumption.
Resumption of what, Professor?
Beg your pardon?
Resumption of what?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. So all this time, I think starting in 1866, but that date is not important for us. Thank you. All this time, the United States was on paper money standard. So this is the green back period. The gold dollar still continued. Remember, I explained that the government collected custom duties and excise taxes in gold coin. So there was gold coinage, but the United States was not on a gold standard because the main money, form of money, means of exchange, was the paper dollar, just nicknamed the greenback. By the way, today still, they must be a very pleasant name because they still kept it, although there's this big difference that the greenback of the 1870s was not a legal tender, but today's Federal Reserve notes are legal tender. All right. Now, the word resumption refers to the resumption of the gold standard. And what it means is withdrawing the greenbacks, progressively withdrawing the greenbacks from circulation by paying off the holder of the greenbacks in gold coins. So that's what resumption means, all right? Resumption of the gold standard. This is a paper standard period, and in that year they decided that they put an end to the paper money standard. However, this was touch and go because they weren't quite sure how many people want to exchange their paper money for gold coins, and therefore they gave themselves plenty of time, 4 years, to prepare for that. They could not, people could not exchange their paper dollars during this time, but on January the 1st, 1879, they could. And there was a banker who said that he was prepared to pay $10,000 for the right to be the first at the door on January the 1st, 1879, to make the conversion. In other words, this guy took a gloomy view that this resumption just won't work, because too many people will try to make the conversion. Now, as it turned out, this is interesting, the banker was completely wrong, because the day passed without any emotional scene or any problem at all. This period was plenty to prepare the people, and then they just accepted that from now on, the paper dollar is exchangeable with the gold coin. See, in between there was an exchange rate between the gold dollar and the paper dollar. And the paper dollar had a lower rate, so I think at the extreme went as low as 30 cents to the gold dollar. If you go back to the actual Civil War period. And this, as a rule, followed the fortunes of the say, the North, the Union, over the South. If they were winning in the field, the Union soldiers were winning in the field, then the ratio went up. And if they were losing, which happened several times, the ratio went down, and as I say, reached a low of 30 cents. And then it could go up again to 50 cents, and go down, and fluctuate. Now, when the Union was in the end victorious, and the Southern forces laid down their weapons, you might have expected the ratio go back to 100, but that did not happen. As we are not surprised, because there was a lot of increase in the money supply by putting these paperbacks into circulation, and they stayed in circulation, and the ratio of the gold dollar to the paper dollar was something like 60. And it wasn't stable at that, because all kinds of extraneous things influenced that rate. So it was sometimes going up a little, down a little, and it was an unstable monetary system, which was one reason why they decided to make a law with the effect that 4 years later there will be a resumption of the gold standard, and the paper dollar will be phased out. Yes.
One quick question. Who issued these greenbacks? Was that the U.S. Treasury?
I think so. The Treasury issued Treasury bills, which were non-interest bearing bills. So it was recognized that they were an obligation of the government. Difference, as many others, the difference was that it was non-interest bearing. Okay? So there was compulsion involved, but it was not a fully fledged legal tender, which is interesting. All right, now, where is the smoking gun? Well, the smoking gun is here somewhere. And I tell you why. Because now there was a law that the greenback will be replaced by gold coins and silver coins. It was the law of the land. But not yet. It will happen in 4 years' time. Now here's a question.
Professor, sorry, did they announce when they passed the law that it would come into effect in 1879?
Well, that was the law.
That was also it was
That's what the law. So in other words, the law didn't do anything at that time, but
the date was already announced.
Yeah, it announced a date by which, from one day to the next, the paper dollar was redeemable at full face value in gold and silver. Okay? And now, this is a very interesting situation which any speculator could grab and run with it. Because you could now visualize a situation that a lot more gold and silver, physical gold, spot gold and silver, will be needed. Not immediately, but in 4 years' time. So in anticipation, and of course there was